Welcome to the preliminary walkthrough, providing an early analysis of the frequently made mistakes I've seen thus far for assignment 3B. As always, make sure you document your code, make sure you address my comments from earlier assignments, and please make sure all the unit and integration regression tests are passing. If you have any questions, please come to office hours. I'll be happy to help. Let's take a look at something left over from assignment 3A. This is in the await completion of futures method. This filter expression is incorrect. It's backwards. And also, please get in the habit of trying to use the rethrow supplier helper method rather than using the explicit approach here, which requires dealing with exceptions and checked exceptions and so on. Also, please get in the habit of using the supertype rather than the subtype here. So this should be lock, not reentrant lock. Please don't be putting calls to lock inside of acquire uninterruptibly. There's no need to do lock and unlock there because that's actually handled in the call to the acquire method, which is called within the acquire uninterruptibly method. And this will cause all sorts of problems, so please make sure you don't do that. And in this particular case, the lock was being acquired, but it was never being released. Now let's start taking a look at some of the issues that arose in the various method implementations. This example happens to largely come from the graduate student version, but the undergrad versions have some similar problems. So make sure that you never call lock inside the try block. Always get in the habit of moving that outside of the try block. And also, likewise, for the grad student version, make sure you also always call unlock in a finally block. Just a good habit to get into. Down here, this is the try to get permit method for the graduate student version. This implementation doesn't meet the specification in the comments. You're only supposed to call unlock if try to get permit unlocked returns true. And so this will always unlock, which you don't want to do for the grad version. Down here, another issue with the grad version, please don't call unlock at all in the try to get permit unlocked method. The whole point of this method is to factor out the code that doesn't involve any locking. So you don't want to be calling unlock in a method that's not supposed to be doing locking at all. Here's some issues with wait for permit, a bunch of different issues here. So in this particular case, you need to call the add method inside of a try finally block so you can unlock the lock just as soon as add succeeds. Make sure you get in the habit of always calling the await method or the wait method if you're doing the undergrad version in a loop to guard against spurious wake-ups. And this particular implementation is not properly handling the case where the interrupted exception is thrown. That should actually be explicitly caught with a catch clause as opposed to dealing with things in the finally block. There are some things to do in the finally block. It's just that this is in the wrong place. In particular, you need to watch the video here and see how to handle errors when the interrupted exception occurs. And it's not quite what's being done in this particular case. Here's an example of what can go wrong inside the release method. So you need to refactor the code so that the mlock, the monitor lock, is not held for the whole duration of this method. You don't want to be doing that. That's overkill. It causes problems, and it means that there's too much synchronization taking place here. In addition, you should not be calling the code here with mlock held. You need to lock the lock that's part of the wait variable that's defined up here, the one that's acquired from poll, not by holding the overall monitor lock for this fair semaphore. That'll get you into all kinds of trouble. Now let's come down here and take a look at some of the issues when we look in the Palantir Manager portion of all this stuff. And as you can see here, first just use collectors to concurrent map as opposed to doing this. This code, of course, is correct, but it's more complicated than you need to have it. So in this particular case, you want to make sure that you use a concurrent map, and that'll just be a cleaner way of doing things. Let's take a look at the acquire method. The call down here, the call to find first, should go after the call to map below. We want to have map occur before find first, otherwise you're dealing with things incorrectly and using the wrong map. And then down here, there's a bunch of different issues with this code. Please don't use the object P and entry set, but instead use Palantir P and key set, because that's one of the wonderful things about the concurrent hash map version, it's going to be really slick and really clean and really efficient. Likewise, down here, please use the 3-parameter version of replace, since that supports the compare and swap semantics, except with a hash map, which is super cool. And you don't need to do a cast if you make the changes I talked about above, where you use Palantir P and keyset. And you don't want to be throwing the cancellation exception here. In this particular case, that's overkill. In this particular case, also make sure you explain what's gone wrong, why you're providing the cancellation exception. Give a string that indicates the problem, the reason. Down here, when you have the for loop, make sure that when you have a for each loop, make sure you wrap that with an extra forever loop, so it'll keep iterating until replace returns true. And then down here, this is also a pretty subtle thing. You should not be using the Java 8 features here. You don't need to use entry set or Java streams or any of this good stuff. Instead, just use a for each loop nested inside of a forever loop that iterates through the key set and calls the 3-param version of replace on each key. This should just be a few very simple lines of code, and it really leverages the simplicity and the efficiency and the power of the 3-parameter concurrent hash map replace method. Down here, one final thing, make sure you provide, again, a reason why you're throwing illegal argument exception. And also, this code needs to be gussied up a bit to make sure that you check whether the replace call is returning Boolean false. You want it to do the right thing, and remember that replace can otherwise return 3 different values. It could return true, it could return false, and it can return null. And we want to make sure that we check properly to see that it's doing the right thing, which is easily done by doing a comparison against Boolean false in a manner like this. Okay, so that's basically the preliminary walkthrough of frequently made mistakes for assignment 3B. Of course, there'll be more once I've had a chance to review other code and after I've had a chance to review the undergrad code, but this is a starting point just to get you up and running.